Hi everyone, be welcome to our webinar in Lighting. First, I'd like to say that these webinars are being organized by our postgraduate program from the Federal University of Santa Maria, and also from the IEEE student branch from our university. So this branch is making the certificate of attendance of the people who are interested on receiving it. In some minutes, I will put the link of a form to be filled. If you fill this form, you will receive the certificate of attendance. Well, today we'll have a very nice webinar regarding color rendering of light sources, the current development in this topic. And I will invite the engineer Vicente Scopacasa to moderate this webinar together with me. So Vicente, welcome to this webinar.
Good afternoon, Marco, and good afternoon to all the participants. It's a pleasure to be here, so thank you so much for inviting me to participate in the seminar, because color recognition is something very, very important, and we are right now, as far as I understand, in a process of change. So any new information regarding that and new tests or work about that is very important. So thank you very much, and I'm assuming you're going to have a very nice webinar today.
Thank you, Vicente. And now I want to introduce our speaker. Is the Professor Michal from the Technical University of Liberec in Czech Republic. And Professor Vic is also member of the International Commission of Illumination, the CIE, of some technical committees. So Professor Michal, be very welcome to the seminar, and please feel free to introduce yourself, your teams, and when you say we can start your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much for introduction of my person. What I would like to say, hello for everybody. Our university is located in north part of Czech Republic. As you know, Czech Republic is in the heart of Europe, and our university has almost 6 faculties, and one faculty, which I member, the Faculty of Textiles, is also oriented on the problem of color science, and relating phenomena. And today I would like to show you some information, some current development in the point of view of color rendering. Not only current development, but also history, because history of this color quality control of light sources is also very important. If we were thinking about colors, we can ask why quality of color rendering of light sources is so important. I think that is well known that after illumination, especially under illumination, via different light sources, we can obtain different color appearance of product. Why? Because spectral power distribution of light is different. but color can be similar. And that is very important to understand how this phenomena works. If we are thinking about a simple situation, as for example about store lighting, you know that via installation of different luminaires, different light sources, we can obtain a little bit brighter, a little bit more saturated or less saturated colors of our product. We can improve color appearance of food, for example. That means food can appear more fresh, more tasty under specific light sources. That means we can work precisely with this phenomena, and we can improve our ability to sell our product, for example. If I will thinking about effect of different spectral power distribution, here is one of simple example. If you're thinking, for example, about triplet LEDs, you can see that the same scene can appear completely different. If I will use RGB LEDs with almost neutral color or neutral white or more cool white, a little bit warm white, or some specific modification caused by shift of the band emitted from LEDs, you can see that the same scene will appear strongly differently. And that is a big problem, because our products should appear similarly if it's necessary. What I mean, if we were thinking, for example, about color constancy, we can have also samples which are so-called color inconstant. What do we mean by that? If I will have, for example, outdoor light, D65, for example, and I will simulate this light source via tungsten type daylight simulator, that means filtered tungsten, with correlated color temperature 6500 kelvins, you can see on the left side of this slide that our sample appear almost green. If I will change my light source into tungsten lamp with correlated color temperature 2700 kelvins, you can see that the same sample appear as brown or more reddish generally, due to different spectral power distribution of light source, because you can see that CRI in both light sources is almost high. Colorimetry Index for daylight simulators 95, for tungsten lamp 99 in this case. If I will compare the same situation with LEDs, you can see that now situation is different. If I will have on the left side warm white LED, you can see that our sample is not so red, not so brown. Why? Because typically LEDs has a problem, is less amount of energy in a red part of spectra. Doesn't matter that CRI is here quite high, 96 units. That is for standard LEDs a little bit high number. But here you can see, in comparison to the tungsten lamp, that our sample appear more green, similarly as under daylight simulator. If I will compare on the other side two light sources at a similar correlated color temperature, on the left side you can see tungsten filtered tungsten daylight simulator, and on the right side you can see cool white violet pump LEDs with high rendering index. You can see that appearance is almost similar. That means we are able to modify spectral power distribution of our LEDs in the form of quite good color representation. how we can do it. In the history, as I said, which is very important, was developed different indices, different systems for evaluation of color quality of light sources. Here is only a few of them, which are most important in point of view of later development. On the beginning was work of Dr. Bouma at Philips company before Second World War. After Second World War, we have a provisional recommendation of CIE. Then, starting from 1974, we have CIE CRI as color rendering index. And now we have CIE CFI, means color fidelity index, and also we have IES test method 30, which is now in version 2020. What was pioneer work of Dr. Bouma? He was working at Philips company on the fluorescent lamps, on the development of fluorescent lamps. And he found that via different phosphors, we can obtain different spectral characteristics and different color of which is resulting as an emission from these fluorescent tubes. And he tried to develop a method, a relatively simple method, how to compare different light sources, artificial light sources, in point of view of their quality. That times he has used Oswald color system, as you can see on the right side of this slide, because this color system was quite interesting in point of view of color uniformity and in point of view of correct description of each sample. That means that was quite rigorous color order system. Based on the Bouma works, was prepared so-called specific CIE temporary recommendation for evaluation of artificial light sources, which is based on the 8 spectral bands. And via these 8 spectral bands was possible to compare different light sources. On the first point of view appear such method good, because it's relatively fast. You need to use only spectral power distribution of light source and you can compute it. What is the problem of Bouma's method? If you can see on the figure here, you can see 2 sets of samples, a little bit light ones and a little bit dark ones. And what is the problem? You can see that on the left side is a daylight, on the right side is tungsten lamp. If I will compare these 2 sets of samples, which in point of view of color difference are the same, you can see that appearance is quite different. Light samples appear much different in comparison to the dark samples. That was one problem. Also, Bouma found that increased saturation of colors caused also increased shift of these colors under different light sources. Unfortunately, as you can see, Dr. Bouma passed away in 1947. That means he hasn't sufficient time for development of new method. This method was criticized because this method has 2 big problems. Inadequate evaluation of light sources with high chromaticity differences and problems with whiting functions, because it was necessary to use specific whiting functions for specific sources. And it was quite complicated system. Due to this thing, it was necessary to develop new methodology for evaluation of color rendering. For better understanding how this methodology works, it's necessary to understand what we mean by color. If we were thinking about CIE definition, you can see here that perceived color is a characteristics of visual perception, then can be described by attributes of hue, brightness, and colorfulness. That means color is so-called three-dimensional. We need to have three terms: hue, brightness or lightness, colorfulness or saturation, or chroma. It is dependent on the situation. And obviously, if we will thinking about difference in colors, we believe that this difference is caused by difference in spectral distribution of color stimuli. There are some exceptions, and I will discuss later which exception we mean. Generally, on this slide, you can see the principle of these three attributes. Hues, that means different color names, red, green, yellow, orange, etc. Different brightness or lightness, that means scale between black and white, simply say. And then we can discuss about colorfulness. That means this green is much colorful in comparison to this one, which is a little bit lighter and also a little bit duller in point of view of appearance. If we are thinking about light sources, we need to understand problem of related and unrelated colors. What do we mean by that? Related colors are typically colors of color surfaces. For example, in our case, color of some car. But from CIE definition, we need to remove geometrical attributes of our perception from our evaluation. And we are doing via form of so-called unrelated colors. We are using typically different kind of mask, and via such mask, I will remove geometrical attribute, and I will see only the red color of car without shape, without geometry of the car. I don't know which model it is. I will see only this aperture color, which is in the middle, for example, in this case, of our mask. I said we can have different situations. You need to understand that in point of view of color science, we need to divide between primary radiator and secondary radiator. That means between color lights and color surfaces or color objects generally. Why? Because situation here is a different. You can see that for primary radiators is a simple situation. We can speak about so-called visual doublet. We have only color source, light source, and observer, because color is related to the humans. It is not pure physics. If we have color surfaces or color objects generally, we need to have so-called visual triplet. That means I need light source, object, and observer. And from this scheme is simple to understand. If I will change light source, I will change also reflected light, which is coming in our eyes. That means I will change color appearance of my object. If we are thinking about our ability to discriminate colors, about our vision, you need to understand that in our retina, which is a sensitive layer inside of our eyes, is containing 4 types of photoreceptors. One photoreceptor is responsible for so-called non-visual action. That means melanopic receptor, and you know maybe current discussion about circadian rhythm and problem with melanopsin suppression, which is a typical effect of some troubles with sleeping, etc. But in point of view of visual actions, we have 4 other receptors, 3 kind of cones and rods. And you can see here how appear spectral sensitivities of these 4 receptors. And what is important, you need to remember, not only such spectral sensitivities are important, but also coding of a signal from these receptors inside of our retina, because there we have also other cells as amacrine, horizontal, bipolar, ganglion cells, etc. And via connection between these cells, we have coding, which is generally as a result of so-called complementary colors. That means, finally, we are discussing about chromaticity and about brightness or lightness of object. If we will discuss color rendering of artificial light sources, our start is with CIE XYZ system. This system was adopted in 1931 by CIE Commission. And what is important to understand from this system? The system is based on the idea that in our eyes we have three types of cones, simply RGB cones. Exactly, today we call it LMS cones because the color are a little bit confusing as a description of sensitivities of our cones. But what is important? CIE XYZ system is a system which allows to describe me correctly appearance of different stimuli which can come into my eyes. What I mean? You remember, I said we have primary radiators, means color lights, and we have secondary radiators as color surfaces. And if I have situation when the color, for example, of color light on the left side of this stimuli is created from light source, and on the right side is created from reflectancy from the object color, here you can see it's impossible to recognize difference between them because both colors are equal. And the same principle, generally metameric colors, is used inside of CIE XYZ system. That means these equations, which you probably knows, show you that light XYZ light in this fact is equal to the reflectances, respective stimuli reflected from or transmitted from the object. How? You can see here spectral power distribution of light source, as we mentioned before. Then we have spectral reflectancy or transmittancy of our object, because light is possible to reflect or light can be able to go through the object via transmission of light. Together, these two spectral distributions will create to me spectral stimuli. That means light which is coming to my eyes. And in my retina, we have three different cones, as I mentioned. How to measure sensitivity of these cones? At 30s of 20th century, it was difficult to measure exact sensitivities of each cone. That times was used a relatively simple experiment, color matching experiment. And on the these schemes, you can see principle of this experiment. If you can use test monochromatic light for illumination of 1/2 of a white tile or white surface, and on the other side you will use illumination combined from red, green, and blue colors. If these two parts will appear the same as here, then you can write that M is equal to RGB. There is one problem which was found during 30s of 20th century. In a specific range of wavelengths, exactly starting from 450 till almost 550 nanometers is impossible via combination of three primaries to obtain the same appearance of this half field. Only when you will move red light source on the second side, then you can rewrite this equation in this form. And this is the reason why CIE standard observer has two maxima. You can see for red we have small maxima and a little bit bigger maxima at longest wavelengths. Via this equation, via this function, we can describe CIE observer. Standard, which is 2 degree, and supplementary, which is 10 degree observer. If we will know these sensitivities, that means we have here a CIE observer, then we will obtain as a result XYZ values, that means the stimulus values, as a basis of CIE XYZ system. You can see here that we have two opportunities to measure it, these values for light sources, or here relatively for color surfaces. Because thinking in 3 dimensions is quite difficult, obviously we are using a simple diagram which is called CIE XY, and which is computed from this simple equation, and here you can see its appearance. That is basis of the CIE XYZ system. And how we will use it for our light sources? I mentioned correlated color temperature. What is meaning of correlated color temperature? Correlated color temperature is possible to explain via virtual experiment, non-real experiment, when we have on the one side black body radiator, and on the other side we have our tested light source. And if I will see as observer that these two parts as a similar, then the temperature of black body radiator is a temperature which is correlated color temperature of our tested light source. Here you can see a simple Planckian equation, which is possible to use for description of black body radiator. And here you can see that increasing of temperature of black body radiator caused shift of emission maxima to the shortest wavelengths. Based on that, you need to remember that increasing of temperature of black body radiator will cause coolest appearance of light source, because shortest wavelengths are near to the green-blue colors, longest wavelengths are related to the orange-red colors. That is the reason why we have light sources, for example, as tungsten lamp, so-called warm white. Then we have, for example, daylight as typical example of cool white system. If I will go back to the color quality of light sources, you need to remember, if we were thinking about quality criteria, we need to divide between two parts, chromaticity and color rendering. Chromaticity is on the beginning because we need to understand that color quality of light sources is typically designed for white light sources or near white light sources. That means there's no reason to discuss about color quality of light source which is positioned here or here or here. Only the light sources which are in this range, which is exactly for white light. I mentioned that during history was developed number of different rendering indices. As we mentioned before, most important is color rendering index based on CIE concept. Then we can discuss color fidelity index or TM30 as a new method which was developed by IES. Besides this rendering indices, we have also indices which are based on the color preferences. For example, Thornton preference index, or SMET memory colors index, or spectral similarity index, which is used typically via movie studios, typically via authors from Hollywood, etc., because that is important for cameras and for creation of movie, typically. But for us, it's important to go via CIE way. I mentioned that system of BOMA was partially adopted in by CIE in 1948. But due to discussion about usability of this concept, was necessary to work on the another possibility how to measure color quality of light sources. In 1960, Dorothy Nicholson published article about color rendering because she was responsible for evaluation of some materials at the US Department of Agriculture, and she used that times uniform chromaticity scale, which is called RUCS. It is interesting because you need to remember this year, before CIE session, that times was only this system adopted as uniform color scale, rectangular color system. It is interesting. Why I am showing? Because here you can see that 18 samples creates almost circle inside of chromacity diagram. If you will see here on the CIE XY diagram, you can see the distribution of this sample is not circular. Why? Because CIE XY diagram has one disadvantage. This is a system which is so-called color non-uniform. And that is one of problem which we need to solve. Another problem is chromatic adaptation. I hope that everybody is able to see now that this tomcat, respect a picture of our tomcat, his name is Werner Karl Heisenberg, this picture is divided in two parts. You can see on the left side, you can see a little bit bluish, and on the right side, a little bit yellowish shade of the picture. Why I am showing? Because now we will do small experiment. Please focus your seeing on this point in the middle. I will measure almost 20 seconds, and then you will see one effect. For a short time, we have seen that this image was almost equal without this division. What is effect? This is effect of so-called chromatic adaptation. That means our eyes are able to adapt on the color of light source. This phenomena was described by Dr. von Gries on the beginning of 20th century, and later via other researchers, as you can see here, Professor Nayatani and Professor Hunt. What was von Gries' concept? He said that sensitivity of our eyes is able to adapt under different stimuli. That means if we were thinking about the ratio between actual sensitivity and maximal sensitivity of our cones, via this way, we can modify our ability to see typically white surfaces. What I mean, if I will read, for example, a piece of paper under a tungsten lamp, I am able to understand that this light is quite yellowish, but at night, for me, appear almost white, because my eyes are adapted. Similar effect you can see here. If we will use white balance for digital cameras, we will obtain almost similar effect. You can see here picture where are two color checkers. On the left side, this checker is illuminated via cool white light source. On the right side is used warm white. And you can see completely different appearance of both standards. After white balance effect, you can see that white appear almost similar, not the same, but difference is not so high as on the beginning. That means our eyes are able to correct appearance of white via shift in sensitivities of individual cones. And this effect is visible here on this diagram. Here you can see position of D65, that means this light source. And here is a position of illuminant 8, almost this light source. And via chromatic adaptation, you can see that appearance of these colors is shifted almost to the equi-energetic spectra, which is related to the balanced white. And this effect, chromatic adaptation, is necessary to include in our system of evaluation of color quality of light sources. That is very important. Based on that, CRI, which was adopted in 1974 as a new standard of CIE, is based on the simple comparison. We have test source and we have reference source. Typically, above 5,000 kelvins, we are using daylight. Below 5,000 kelvins, we are using spectral power distribution of a blackbody radiator. Based on decision which reference light source we will use, we can calculate XYZ coordinates of specific samples. That means here we have reflectance data of selected samples. And we will obtain XYZ values for test source and reference source. Then it's necessary to go to the more color uniform system. Now we are using a CIE UCS system from 1960, exactly because this system was abandoned. Now you will see in the latest version of this standard that there is a specific calculation from CIE LUV color space where V is equal to 2 divided by 3, because this ratio was used this year for calculation of UCS system. These new coordinates inside of a more color uniform color space are then via Von-Cries transformation to transformed via chromatic adaptation into new values, and difference between them is then recalculated as a set of color differences, and finally these differences are summarized and recalculated in the form of color rendering index. You can see here that still after adaptation the colors are different, are not the same, because this adaptation is insufficient and also is based on the quality of used light source. On the right side, you can see typical evaluation of some of light sources. Here is tri-band fluorescent. Here is a typical blue pumped white LED as example. And here you can see result. Color rendering here is 65 for typical tri-band fluorescent tubes, which are used as office lighting. We have values above 80 because that is in many national standards necessary color rendering for office lighting. And here in this case 84, you can see a result for this calculation. I am showing here also this results because here you can see example of now unaccepted spectral resolution, because here you can see that resolution is 10 nanometers. Now you need to understand that we need to go to the much thinner or narrow resolution less than 5 nanometers, recommended is to use resolution 1 nanometer. I said that it's necessary to use color uniform system. Why? Because in CIE XYZ system, respectively in CIE XY diagram, we have problem. The same color difference for our eyes is represented with different distances. You can see here example of so-called macadam ellipses. That means just noticeable color differences of a standard observer. And you can see that in green region of colors, we have a quite big ellipse, in comparison quite small ellipse in the blue region. And this phenomena is called as color non-uniformity. You have seen that in 1939 and also during Second World War were developed number of transformation from XYZ system into new UCS system. Here you can see CIE UV system from 1960 as a system where distribution of color differences is a little bit more uniform. Here you can see funny drawing, which is description of phenomena, how to do it. I think that we can go through. What is a problem of CRI? You know that CRI is quite problematic in point of view of LEDs, and typically for narrow band sources generally. You can see here two examples. On the left side, you can see a light source where rendering index is only 13. On the right side, you can see other light source which has a rendering index 51. Here you can see difference between them. Position of these light sources. I know that these sources are outside of recommended limit, but it is only a school example how to understand it. And my question now is, if you will compare these two specimens, which appear for you more natural? I think that for many of people, this left sample, left color checker, appear more natural, more relevant. But you can see here only 13. Here, this one 51. How to solve it? How to solve this problem? One of opportunities is development another metric. In 2015, IES accept a new test method which is called 30. That times was with year description 15, then was a new version 18, and current standard is 2020. What is the difference between test method 30 and CIE color rendering index? There are many important differences. You can see first thing, CRI is only fidelity metrics. That means we can have situation when we have two light sources with the similar or same color rendering index, but appearance of product will be completely different. And we haven't opportunity how to discriminate between these two sources. If I have a combination of indices as used in TM30, you can use, for example, Gamut metric for discrimination between sources which will increase saturation or decrease saturation typically. Then another difference is with use of a uniform color system. As I mentioned, color rendering index is based on the Abaddon uniform color space from 60s of the 20th century and Foncre's adaptation. Current development is based on the color appearance models, which include inside of own structure new and more precise chromatic adaptation, and also another adaptation mechanism. That is, such a description is much more uniform and universal, mainly. Then you can see differences in number of samples. Another problem is discontinuity. I said light sources with correlated color temperature above 5000 kelvins, we will compare with daylight models, Illuminant D from CIE system. Below 5000 kelvins, we are using Planckian radiator. And now is the question, what will happen if I will have light source with correlated color temperature 4999, and then another one with correlated color temperature 5001 Kelvin? Difference between them will be only 2 kelvins. Such difference is a typical computing error for many of light sources. But in one side, I will compare it with Planckian radiator. In the other side, I will compare it with daylight series. And that is a problem. Based on that, in test method is used a smooth technique, which allows continuous shift between Planckian radiator and daylight series. And last typical problem of CRI is no lower score limit. What does this mean? That means for some of light sources you can obtain negative values, negative color rendering index. In TM system or CFI system is scale from 0 to 100 for simple understanding what is exact meaning of color rendering. If we will compare both methods, you can see that for first point of view appear almost similar. Difference is in use of new chromatic adaptation inside of CAMO2 model, and also with use of CAMO2 UCS system. Then we will calculate differences, color differences inside of this uniform system. That is one difference in concept. Other difference is in number of samples used for color rendering. I mentioned that in case of standard color rendering index, we are using only 8 basic samples. You remember, Nicholson recommended 18, but CIE chose only 8 from the whole scale. And if we will use only 8 samples, we have problems, because it was measured that errors caused by limited number of samples are dramatically decreased with increased number. In TM30, we are using now 99 samples. These samples were selected from a huge database of color surfaces and color spectra, and now gives us almost uniform result of in point of view of distribution. If you will thinking about CAMO2 model, you need to remember what is the difference between CIE XYZ system and CAMO2 model. On the beginning, we have color matching function from XYZ system. Why? Because we need to have connection between photometry and colorimetry. That is very important, because still we need to use colorimetry for measurement. But we know that sensitivity of our cones is different in comparison to these curves. And if we will need to use chromatic adaptation, we need to work based on the von Kries concept with real sensitivities of our cones. That means these values is necessary to transform in the form of such sensitivities, SML, short, middle, and long wavelength sensitive cones. And after chromatic adaptation, we need to thinking about complementary colors, as I mentioned before. That means CAM02 model is based on this transformation, and because colorists and color scientists needs to work with rectangular system, typically we are using lightness and two chromatic doublet terms, red, green axis, yellow, blue axis as a other possibility to explain position of our colors. And I mentioned that in a system of TM30 method or CFI, we are using uniform version of this color space, which is described by this equation. All these equations are described in CIE standard. That means I will not discuss details of this system. Here you can see comparison of distribution of both sets. On the left side, you can see 8 samples of CRI. On the right side, you can see 99 samples of TM method, and also now CFI of CIE. In XYZ system expected in CIE XY diagram. Or you can represent it in different color spaces. On the left side, you can see in distribution of these samples in CIE LAB color space. On or right side, you can see distribution of these samples in UCS version of CAM02 model. What is interesting here for experts, please remember one thing. Here you can see compression, which is typical for UCS, because here, if we will use the same scale, you can see that known problem of CIE LAB color space is extension in the yellow direction. Another thing here, you can see in point of view of lightness, you can see that we are using almost not so dark samples, because many of samples in database were measured via spherical devices, which will measure whole reflectance factor of the samples. That means all reflected light. What is a little bit problematic in point of view of color rendering, partially, but it is for other discussion. How is possible to compute differency? It is necessary to remember that if I will compare position of samples of my tested light source in comparison to the test light source or reference light source, the position of the samples will be changed in color space. And this difference I can describe via 3 terms: hue, chroma or saturation or colorfulness, or we can speak about desaturation shift or saturation shift, and also we can discuss about lightness shift. All these 3 terms are included, and via simple calculation, which is generally Pythagoras law in color space, we will obtain final color difference between reference and tested light source for each of 99 color samples. Then I have opportunity to compute Fidelity Index, as you can see here from this equation. What is interesting, you can see here, contrary to CRI, that we are using 99 samples. Here, this factor is only scaling factor. In first version of TM30 was a little bit higher, above 7. Now is used the same scaling factor as in CFI. And other thing is here, this logarithmic transformation of the scale, which allows to obtain finally range between values starting from 0 to 100. What is one thing what is important, please remember, if you will have specific light sources with low color fidelity, below 20, this scale is a little bit confusing. That means it's not quite good for quite low color fidelities. But we hope that main application is for high color fidelity light sources. Also, we can use for another comparison of our light sources, so-called Gamut Index. Why? Because you need to remember that some of light sources can increase saturation of our colors, and some of them are able to decrease saturation of colors. And based on that, we can measure mean value, mean increase of saturation or mean decrease of saturation via comparison of areas of tested and reference light source. If I will combine together these two indices, I will obtain such simple diagram. Here you can see on the bottom I have Fidelity Index, and here I have Gamut Index. And if I will try to understand what is the meaning of this diagram, it's relatively simple, because higher color fidelity is or highest is 100. That means here. Ideal or reference light source Gamut Index will be 100. That means this line is related to the 100 Gamut Index. That means reference source will be here. Our test source, for example, here, blue pumped LED, white LED, has a typical problem. Less amount of energy in this blue-green range of spectra, and also less energy typically in red part of spectra and partially in blue-violet part of spectra. And via that, you can see we obtain a little bit less Gamut Index, and of course we have also a little bit less Fidelity Index, because there is a relatively huge difference between these two sources. If you are thinking about this method, typically if you will see a report from this method, inside of the report you will obtain not only these two numbers. You can see here Fidelity and Gamut Index, but also you will know information about colorated color temperature, and also about distance from reference light source. And this graphics allows you to understand how different is your tested light source in comparison to the reference one. For example, here you can see quite high similarity in point of view of color rendering between this tested light source, which is exactly daylight simulator based on the fluorescent tubes. It means typically F7 from CIE nomenclature against spectrum of daylight. Here you can see typical problem of blue pumped LEDs with one phosphor, where we have here in this part typical problem with desaturation, because here and here we have less amount of energy and colors are appear much duller in comparison to reference light source, and partially we have some energy above energy of a reference light source. That means here you can see these two increased saturation of this light source. And these arrows will show you also shift or respective direction of shift of hues caused by your tested light source. And here you can see substantial metrics. And here is evaluation. Similarly, you can see a comparison for cool white LEDs And here you can see difference between cool white blue pumped LED. Here is a violet pumped LED with 3 phosphors, blue, green, and red. And you can see here that similarity between these 2 graphics is quite high. That means you can see that Gamut Index is almost near to the 100, only 105. But what is important, you can see that the shift is quite small, and general rendering is relatively high, 90, in comparison to the 68 and 96 for this blue chip-based white LEDs. It is TM30 last only one possibility for color rendering? I think no. We need to thinking about another possibilities, how to evaluate our light sources. If we were thinking deeply about concept of mentioned rendering indices, you remember we need to have test source and reference source. That means we have this situation. We are thinking about color appearance of this object. If I will change from the test source to reference source, or vice versa. But the question is, it is a real situation? Have we in the store or somewhere possibility to compare color quality of our artificial light source with its reference? Obviously, we haven't this opportunity. That means we can thinking about another method. Here we can see concept which is relating to the so-called metamerism. And here, sufficient is only tested light source. We don't need reference one, because our sample has a special property. What is metamerism? Metamerism is special property when 2 samples under specific viewing conditions, including light source, observer, and other conditions, will appear similarly or same, and with change of this condition will appear differently. For better understanding, you will see here what we mean. While constancy or inconstancy of our samples, if I will change from daylight into tungsten lamp, first shift is relatively high, as you remember here. We don't think now about chromatic adaptation. But if I will thinking deeply about metamerism, typical example is here from clothing industry. If you will go in the store, for example, in the Marks and Spencer or Walmart or other stores, you can buy your sweater or trousers, and they are used typically tri-band lamps. And you can see on the tri-band lamp, these 2 goods appear similarly. But if you go outside of the store, now you can be badly surprised because your sweater appear much differently in comparison to your trousers. And that is effect of metamerism, which is not only problem of textile industry, but also other color industries. If you are thinking deeply about metamerism, I said that CIE XYZ system allows us to describe objectively this phenomena. Under one condition, we can have this situation. That means these 2 samples will match, will appear the same, because XYZ values will be equal. You need to remember, our eyes are not spectrometers. Our eyes are, in brackets, colorimeters. That means our stimuli generally is something as a result of integral under area of spectral power distribution of spectral stimuli. If I will change light source, of course, this distribution will change, and as a result, we will have this not equivalency between XYZ values. and we can see different appearance of both samples. In real example, you can see here also samples which are so-called metameric. Under daylight simulator, you can see that these two samples appear almost similar. If I will use home lighting or tungsten lamp, you can see that one of them appear quite differently, much reddish or much brownish, as you want to call it, due to metamerism. If I will use another light sources, you can see also problem. Here is a violet chip-based cool white LED. Here is a blue chip-based cool white LED. And you can see different appearance. Here is a higher metamerism, here is lower metamerism for the same set of samples with use of different light sources. That means we can use metamerism as one of possible test method for evaluation of color quality of our light sources. I mentioned also that beside CIE way of color rendering, we have also another indices allowing us to evaluate color quality of light sources. One of typical systems is based on the evaluation of color appearance of food product, etc. For example, here you can see a typical problem. This image is under natural daylight. Here you can see a light source with a lower gamut. That means you can see here so-called desaturated colors. Here we have a light source with high color gamut. That means we can see here oversaturated colors. But if I will ask you which picture show to you much more tasty dinner, I guess that many of you will ask this one confirms more with my needs. Based on that, in the 60s, Sanders developed his own index, which was called SCD, and this index was based on the measurement of color preference or color shift of 6 different products: chips, butter, tea, meat, I'm sorry, human skin, and also color of skin of our hands. And based on that, we can measure shift and distribution of acceptance color difference for each of these 6 products. And based on that, you can see here such possibility how to measure it. Similar philosophy is based on the Judd, Thornton, and Smet indices. All of these indices show to us that people mostly prefer saturated colors. And that is also a reason why, for example, present day smartphones or tablets use this philosophy for representation, for example, capture a picture. That means if you will capture, for example, some natural scene, grass, which will be represent, means color of grass, which will be represented on the display of your smartphone, will be much brighter, much colorful in comparison to the real situation. Because in our memory, we remember much colorful grass than in reality is. And that is a principle of this kind of rendering indices. So that was shortly from my side. I'm sorry I was a little bit longer than was expected, but I hope that was interesting for you to hear my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michal. It was very nice, very interesting, this presentation. This topic is is a little bit difficult for electrical engineers, but who is working with lighting must to understand these concepts. So now we can open some time for questions, and I should ask the attendants to send the questions through the chat. And while we expect these questions, I know that Vicente has some questions for you. So Vicente, you can make your questions now. Thank you.
Okay, so first of all, it was a very nice presentation, Professor Michal. We really appreciate that. Very technical, very good. So I can tell you that I learned a lot of new stuff. Let me tell you that. So my first question is, you mentioned in your presentation that CIE already came with the Fidelity Index.
Yeah.
But I am aware that they have another committee, the TC191, which is looking for another metric beyond fidelity. So my question is, do you know how is the actual situation and what we can expect from this?
It is a relatively difficult question because this another technical committee is based on the philosophy which is a little bit far from color fidelity, as you mentioned. And now is situation a little bit frozen, by my opinion, because partially appear brackets as politics. I don't understand well why discussion sometimes on CIE meetings about this phenomena is so difficult between different experts. But what is interesting, during adoption of CFI was quite a strong discussion, because first idea was to adopt IES method. That means, you remember, IES TM30 was adopted in 2015, and CFI was adopted in 2017. And during discussion in Division 1, which I am member of this division, was quite difficult to find common agreement between experts for this index. And finally was decided that only Fidelity Index CFI will be accepted, and Gamut Index will be still under current research in many of research groups. Why? The problem is typically with increased numbers which we have now for disposal. Main advantage of CRI was that we obtain only one number, that means it is simple for local people to understand what you mean. If I have low rendering index, it is worse source. If I have high rendering index, I have better source. That is simple. But in TM30, we have now new set of information, and not every people are familiar with these metrics, because also here it's possible to have situation when you will obtain same fidelity index, same Gamut index, but finally the product will appear differently. And you need to thinking about hue shift and about another possibilities how to divide between these two light sources. And this is generally possible for experts or people who are involved in color science. But for businessmen, for customers, is sometimes difficult to explain them how the system works, because they need huge lecture how the system works, and as you can see here, it was quite compressed lecture about this phenomena, and take more than 1 hour. That is one thing. Another thing is problem of memory colors. Because you remember, Dr. Smith published his memory index in 2013 or 14. I am not sure exactly about year, doesn't matter by my opinion. But what is the problem? How to measure exactly memory colors? This result is strongly dependent on the setup of experiment. And that is another problem why the technical committee, I think that TC 91 was TC responsible for CFI, and 92 is responsible for the another way how to evaluate color quality of light sources. And there are quite active people from Darmstadt and from Germany, generally, because they are focused on this more psychological way for evaluation. Yeah, that means if I will compare both views on the problem, CFI or TM30 is more scientific or more technical. Memory colors or color preferences are more psychological view on the problem.
Thank you very much. And I think I believe you already answered that during your presentation, but I'll ask it again. Does color saturation really counts for human perception?
Yeah, that is quite a difficult question, because the problem is how we understand now how our system, visual system works, because I mentioned that on the level of retina, signal from cones is recomputed in brackets in form of complementary colors. But this is not only this coding inside of our system, because another complementary coding is on the level of LGN, lateral genicular nucleus, what is also almost in the middle part of our brain. And last coding is in visual cortex. That means generally we have 3 times coding of colors, and that is also a reason why our sensitivity for different colors is so high, because people are able to remember almost 7,000 colors. But what is important, if we have 2 colors together with thin contact, also naive observers are able to recognize more than 2 million of colors. That means quite a huge number. It's incredible. And if we are thinking about memory colors, about more saturated colors which are used now, I think that is the similar in brackets almost as dream, because it is interpretation of our brain. It is not exactly on the physical basis this thinking about colors, and that is by my opinion also a problem, because if we will have physical stimuli, we can measure it. But here is difficult to thinking about that, because sometimes it's almost our wish, not reality. in fact, and that is a problem, by my opinion.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Professor Marco, there's another question from the audience.
No, the audience they didn't send any question so far.
So can I make a final question?
Yes, please.
Okay, so Professor Michal, we have different results when we tested the same light source using the R9 method for the red and the TM30. So what I did is I measured the same light source in the laboratory, and I got something like 18 score for R9 using the CRI method, and I found for the same light source I found almost 90 for the reds in the TM30. So do you believe this is because of the number of samples that we use more samples in the TM?
Yeah.
Is that the reason, do you think?
Yeah, that is a reason, because in fact in CRI, because the R9 is a relatively bright red, and because there is a relatively sharp interval when the reflectancy of this red is increasing, this quite sharp or fast increasing of reflectancy will cause problem for specific light sources. And there we have many problems, because one of thing is what I mentioned during my presentation. One problem is the resolution of spectrometers or spectroradiometers which we are using, because generally for measurement of LEDs is recommended by CIE to have devices with resolution better than 5 nanometers. But frequently we are confused because many of simple tools or many of relatively cheap devices which are available now on the market, typically portable spectroradiometers, will inform you about the resolution which appear as a 1 nanometer resolution, but in point of view of real physical resolution, this system are quite worse. Frequently about 10 or more nanometers are spectral sensitivities, respective spectral resolution of this system. That is one thing. That means if I will measure the same light source, maybe I don't know if I am able to show on my computer one Excel system, Excel file. If it's possible, I don't know. I will try it. So just a moment, only it's necessary to start. Here I have my Excel program which we are using in our laboratory, and I'm sorry, it's quite big software. And here you can see position of 99 samples of TM30 method. And why I'm showing, because here I have opportunity to change into different light sources. And if I will use, for example, I don't know if I remember well, maybe I will be mistaken, I'm not sure. Maybe 20. Now you can see how position of samples are shifted. And what is important, why I'm showing, because here we have illuminants with 1 nanometer resolution. Exactly, this one is a triband fluorescent. And if I will show you here, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit, maybe it's visible now. Here you can see how appear 1 nanometer resolution of triband fluorescent. But typically, people haven't such kind of data with such narrow resolution. If I will use standard, as you can see, TM30 system, I need to say to auditoria that now it's possible from IES web page to download new test method, also with supplementary Excel files, allowing you to compute color fidelity and gamut and other criteria of your light sources. And if I will choose, for example, here, I'm not sure if I will be able. Maybe I will choose another one. Just a moment. Maybe here, this one will be better. Okay. And here, if I will change to the F11, we need to wait for calculation. I'm sorry, I have a little bit slow computer. I'm sorry. But what is important, you can see here that the spectrum of the same light source, because here is 5 nanometer resolution, it appears differently. And based on that, especially for CRI, you can obtain also different result for R9 sample.
Okay, well, yeah, very well. Well, actually, Professor, I would like to share with the audience that all this material you are presented is free of charge, right? You can go to the IES website, web store, and download it for free. It's a very nice material.
Yep. I completely agree. And also, I can promise that also we are preparing in our laboratory some new data set, and also our Excel software, which will be also free of charge, available for auditoria, and you can use it for your needs. It is, I think, also very good for people who are working with colorimetry and lighting technology, because as I mentioned, here we have opportunity to check different spectra. If you have some own samples, because what is also important to say, now 2020 version of TM30 methods is also included with 1 nanometer resolution of color samples. And that is very important because in 2015 version were used different method of extrapolation of spectra in comparison to the current method. And sometimes it can be confusing also in point of view of result, because number of samples were limited in point of view of reflectancy in a range, expecting interval starting from 400 till 700 nanometers, and for computing was necessary to extend it. And in 2015 was used different method in comparison to the standard CIE method, and that was also one of source of differences in comparison of same light sources, which can confuse users.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Marco, I believe I have all my questions answered. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Vicente. Well, now we have one question from the audience. Igor made a question. Actually, he has stolen my question that I was going to do to Professor Michal. But Igor is thank you for the presentation. And when do you think we will start to see the manufacturers? I think the LED manufacturers using new standards such TM30 for classifying the light sources?
I hope that it will be possible, because by my opinion, if I will compare both methods, I think that TM30 allows better comparison of different products, and manufacturers can compare much better own products in competitive ones. That is one thing. Other thing is before this free of charge ability to download this tool was only limited number of software available on the market, which includes this methodology. By my opinion, Osram Sylvania software, which is also possible to download free of charge from their web pages, is including this method, and that is usable. But many of current days software is not equipped or including this methodology. That was problem for manufacturers. Now I think due to this opportunity, which is quite great, I need to say again, I am quite happy that it's available now free of charge from IES. I think that today we have a good start point for this evaluation. That is my wish, my dream, because I think now it is I think better tool which we have. It is not final solution, of course, but I think this tool is much more better in comparison to the CRI. We tested CRI with increased number of samples also, and we found that if CRI will be applied on the, for example, 300 samples, because it's no problem, it's only computing. Also, this index will be much better in point of view of evaluation of light sources. But the problem is that it's not standardized, and we need to have worldwide accepted standard. And as I said, due to strong discussion between experts in CIE, now situation is a little bit frozen, and I'm not sure. I think that IES is now a little bit progressive than CIE. But I hope, because I am a member of CIE, I hope that we will be able to adopt in CIE system this new metrics with all mentioned advance.
Just to complement this question, Professor Michal, do you think the TM30 will be the new standard for evaluating the color rendering of light sources, or any other standard?
I'm not sure, because last meeting which we had in Washington, that times was strong discussion if we will go by the way of increased or modification of current standard 13.3 for color rendering, or if we will adopt this TM30 philosophy. And as I said, the problem is that now is difficult to predict if CIE members will accept or which standard will be accepted by CIE. I'm sorry, I haven't glassware. it is difficult to predict, but my position is relatively simple. I think that it's better to use TM30 because it's based on the new or latest color metrics of CIE, and also other advantage which is now relatively hidden for people is that now we are trying to test also how differ we will obtain results for people with different age, because CIE Confundamentals Observer allows us to simulate sensitivity of people with different age, and we can also simulate different viewing angles. And based on that, we will obtain also different sensitivities. And also at this point is, I think, quite interesting because, you know, for example, for designers, for architecture, it's important how elderly people will see some scene, what will be optimization of room design for elderly people, etc. Yeah, that means we can also use this system. But by my opinions, Camo 2 allows us to do it, contrary to former CRI concept. Yeah, that means, by my opinion, now I am looking a little bit forward to this future.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Michal. We don't have any other question from the audience. So first, I want to thank you, Vicente, for your participation and your questions and to share your knowledge with us. If you have your last words to say, please feel free.
Okay, I think I will give you a PDF version of my presentation. That means if somebody will prefer to download it, it will be possible to use it. It is free, and if you need to discuss with me some other questions, please feel free and contact me. My email address is quite simple. michael.vik@tul.cz, or somewhere can be written. I think I wrote it on the beginning of my lecture, but I'm not sure. But if somebody needed this, I am available, I hope. So thank you for your attention and for nice questions.
Okay, thank you, Vicente.
Well, thank you again for the invitation. It was very productive, and I hope to be in contact with you, Professor Michal. I really, you know, I would like to have your presentation, so we'll be in touch. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you also.
Thank you, Vicente. One final information. Next week, we have another webinar, also from the University of Professor Michal, the University of Liberec, with Leos Kukaka, that he will present one webinar about flicker, light flicker. So this will be our last webinar from this series. So thank you very much for your participation and for the attendance of everyone. Thank you and have a good week.